Hello, everyone. Go ahead.
Yeah, apologies, we're running a little bit late today than usual. So let's hope that's okay. Just yeah, a bit of a technical difficulties for us, but we're here, and as usual, these are our weekly live conversations where we share a variety of topics from health and well-being space. And this time, we wanted to bring the topic um, about technology and addiction to our phones. That is such a big problem, and yet we are not speaking enough about it, and we sometimes don't know what to do when we are aware of the issues. So yeah, we'd love to hear some comments, questions, suggestions from you in terms of what is your relationship with technology, and what is your relationship with your phone. How much time do you spend on a screen? And we can then explore together some different themes to see to what extent it's helping you and supporting your health and well-being, and to what extent it's actually hindering you.
Absolutely. And I think, with this, we'd really love to hear your experiences. So we're going to be asking some questions and giving some statistics, and hopefully that can act as a little bit of a benchmark that you can measure yourself against as well. We'll be talking about some techniques to kind of balance our relationship with our phones so that we really make the best out of technology. There's lots of exciting technology, and I know that you've kind of experienced some of that recently, Evelina. So no doubt you can kind of mention a little bit about that. But there's a lot of exciting technology that can benefit our health and well-being. No doubt people have been using, there's a lot of wellness apps coming up. But there's a way to engage with that so that it really does benefit your well-being, rather than kind of perpetuating phone addiction. So we're going to cover some of those topics.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with a question to those who are listening. How long, how often do you check your phone, and what do you feel? What is the average? How much people check their phones during the day? Valentina, how is it about you? What do you think? How often do you check your phone?
So when you shared the statistics that you did with me earlier, I at first was really shocked about it, and I thought, no, surely I don't check it that regularly. But when I actually think about it, there can half an hour can go by where I'm checking it every couple of minutes if I'm in conversation with someone, or I'm looking things up, or then there's an app that I need to engage with, or I'm logging things. I use a fair amount of health apps, so things to monitor, like meditation apps, things to help with sleep, yoga app, like menstrual tracker app, fasting tracker app, all of these things. And so I'm engaging with it even to just log those kinds of statistics. And I think that kind of, while I probably don't think of some of those behaviors as engaging with my phone, actually it does draw me out of my environment and or other tasks and being present in what's happening around me. And so while it might support my health in some ways, it is also probably interrupting that attention and focus.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about
So
you?
yeah, so from the statistics, they say that the average, and this is the average. So obviously, there will be people who are using way more than that and less. But the average, we check our phone 63 times a day. So even if we look at our kind of a usual day of, 14, 15 hours, that is more often than every 15 minutes, right? And if we are considering this, that we probably have time when we're checking it more often, and time and maybe when we don't, but in average we are not even creating for ourselves enough time to do this focused work. And with how much time we spend on our screens now, statistics really vary based on which statistics you look at, and by whom it is completed. But there's quite a consistent stat around UK screen usage the phone, this is just the phone, not the wider screen time, is around 4 hours 45 minutes a day. And that's that's that in itself is a shocking realization, right? And then you add, of course, your working screen time. You look at, time that we spend educational content, watching TV as well, and so on, which is again, not included. So depending on what you include, it can add up to the average screen time between like 6.5 hours to 11 hours. So yeah, if we use our screen for work, if we then watch movie after, if we then check our phones, there are some days that we are potentially spending our entire day in some ways connected to one screen or another. And that is yeah, I mean, to what extent do we believe this is good and this is bad, right? Because obviously there are benefits of this, and there are ways, like you said, you can track your health, you can track a lot of things that otherwise you wouldn't have a way to log it. But at the same time, what is the impact of that screen on us and on our behavior and on our ability to engage with our environments, right? So yeah.
Absolutely, and engage with ourselves. So, when we are looking at a screen, our attention is outside, and it's, not in the same way necessarily as when it's outside, kind of in our tangible environment, because then there's a bit more of a reciprocal loop there. But it's really kind of being sucked into something entirely different. And, with something like health apps, I think there's quite a fine line, and we want to be quite careful with those things, because often they can help at the beginning, help us grow awareness about our own bodies and our patterns and what's happening there. But there's a certain point at which we can end up becoming too dependent on them and actually lose that relationship with our bodies, relying on an app to tell you if you've had a good night's sleep. I mean, I'd like to know if I've had a good night's sleep in my body and in my mind without needing to have an app to tell me. And I think it can really do quite a lot of damage to trust in our relationship with ourselves, and also our interoception, just stopping being present in your body, feeling how you're feeling without always looking to something external to tell you how you're feeling, what you should be doing, and kind of how to, best engage with your day.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me personally, and I didn't answer the same question from you. It just, it's very interesting when we look at how much time do I spend on screens. And I have to say that the best thing I have ever done was to put my phone permanently on silence. And this can be frustrating for some of my family, friends, because they know that, if they call me, I will not answer the phone unless, they call somehow coincidentally at that moment that I'm holding phone in my hand, so then that I would answer it, right? But for me, like now, occasionally, if I'm waiting for some important call, or I'm waiting for my daughter to finish work so I can go and collect her, and I put the phone back on off mute, again, put with all the sounds on, I realize how disturbed I am by all of these notifications and pings and all of that. And for me, just having that silence, and therefore choosing the time when I want to check, instead of where somebody else other side of the world decided to message me. That is their time, it's their terms. It doesn't mean that I need to receive those messages here and now, and I check my phone at when I'm available at my times and time scales. And that's, for me, that just did such a huge, for me, it was the best thing that I've done, really, in terms of redefining my relationship with screens, especially that, as you know, with the work that we do, having a remote team, just by nature of it, we spend so much time on a computer screen and so on. So I really didn't want to then, also add that phone to it. And keeping my phone on silent just really did really, really good thing for me.
I bet. And I think that's such an important kind of example of finding boundaries that work for you. For me, it's I put my phone on do not disturb and I actually I put it out of sight and out of reach. And it sounds like I'm a child, but sometimes I think it's the cognitive labor that sometimes it happens in the background of resisting checking a phone as soon as you think something. Like sometimes I'll think, oh, I wonder about this. It might be that I need to check my calendar for something, or I need to check a date. And it's not necessarily respond to a message or check up on anything else that might be happening in my phone, but it's that I'll immediately go to it as the answer to my question. The phone will have the answer no matter what. And I think it's important to kind of put that aside so we don't have that option sometimes. And we think, okay, actually, do I need to know that immediately right now? Is there another way that actually I can just sit with it and kind of come up with an answer in a different way, depending on what the question actually is, and also being able to recognize like what is necessary knowledge and what is unnecessary. Because I think what can often happen with us and our phones is that we are taking in so much information, so much more than really any other time or generation prior to us. We are constantly receiving information, and that can really cognitively tire us. And therefore, again, more than any generation previous to us, we have to be that much stricter and boundaried with choosing actually what do I want to take in, and acknowledging that there's a cost to that as well, that's filling a space and that takes cognitive labor, and actually placing a boundary. Maybe I don't need to know that. Maybe I don't need to read that article right now. I don't need to answer that question right now.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're highlighting, this kind of information overload that we have, because what this does to our brains, that it completely changes our neurobiology in terms of how we respond to rewards and specific triggers. So when we think about dopamine, right, and we think of it as this kind of a reward dose of a reward, right, that kind of gives you, what is happening throughout the process when we engage with specific activities, when we go out to pursue specific activities, the dopamine is not actually released once we receive the reward. The dopamine is actually released while we are anticipating that reward, in order to then fuel that action and that behavior of going and getting it, right? So it's really important mechanism of reinforcing our behavior of action, to strive for something, to achieve something, to go and do something. And now we have created this world where that gap of traveling from A to B to get to the goal that you're trying to achieve, it's pretty much instant, right? So we are, like you say, you check the phone immediately, like you want an answer, you want a piece of information, you want, whatever that is that you desire now, it can be accessible at our fingertips immediately. And this actually really, really affects our ability to then take action on things that matters, because we are not even utilizing this piece of our body software that says you get up, you go, you make an effort, you struggle, and then you get that reward, right? There is no effort, there is no intentional labor that we'd have to go to get certain things. Hi, James. Saying hello to those who are just tuning in. So yeah, we'd love to hear as well from those of you who are listening. What is your relationship with phone, with technology, and to what extent is it helping you, and to what extent it's hindering your health, well-being, and to what extent it's affecting your habits. And I think definitely it is so important to redefine this relationship with technology, because the impact of it is not just this time that maybe we are wasting, scrolling through TikTok or, watching videos on YouTube one after another and so on. It's not just time. It's also what are we doing to our neurobiology in terms of nurturing that part that gets us out of our seats and encourages us to achieve, work towards our goals and make it happen.
Absolutely. That's a really good point raised as well about familiarizing ourselves and getting comfortable and, rewarded by the process of struggle, challenge, and reward. And it can really make it quite difficult if we don't experience that in our everyday lives, and we're constantly conditioning ourselves that we will immediately get an answer as soon as we check our phone. As soon as we have a question, we can have an answer. As soon as we want something, we can order it probably to our house within 24 hours. And all of this really interrupts that process of strengthening ourselves, our confidence and our trust in ourselves that we can achieve things, and also familiarizing ourselves with the emotional patterns that we get into along that journey and how to manage that when we do have to challenge, struggle, and get rewarded. And I think it's also important here to kind of recognize that this is something that's very new, and this is not something that is kind of like, this is really fighting phone use and the way our society is structured around that instant gratification. We have to really fight that because our neurobiological evolution is not geared towards that state. And so it's natural for us to want to lean on those things. We don't want struggle. We inherently want things to be easier, but actually we're disabling our ability to struggle and to kind of achieve if we are too reliant on immediately getting an answer. And also, what that doesn't exercise in us cognitively, problem solving skills, we don't practice that, carefully. Even just things like looking at something in front of you and figuring out how to use it if it breaks, rather than immediately looking up
for answers elsewhere, because it will be given to you on a plate, right? Instead of looking at those things. Absolutely. So thank you for comments and engagements. This comment saying that even mirrors were the top tech at some old days, and absolutely, I think when we are looking at the fast pace of evolution of technology and what we are seeing now, what we were using, we really need to look at it in the context to understand to what extent it's useful and to what extent it's helpful. So let's explore those both areas, right? How can we actually use technology to support our well-being? And again, when we're looking at it as well in a context of working environment, what is it as employers we need to be aware of as well in terms of utilizing technology at work to support that, and what can we do as individuals for ourselves, but also where that goes too far, and what are those negative impacts of it, and what we can do to mitigate this negative impact of the technology on our health and well-being. So Valentina, what would you say are kind of the key positives of having this access to technology that drives our health and well-being in a positive way?
So I think some of the key things are that we do have access to a wealth of information that we now don't have to struggle or search so much for, or spend so much time on. We can access a huge, and part of that as well is being able to outsource a lot of our cognitive requirements and cognitive labor into technology. So where otherwise you may have to kind of keep notes for things and hold calendar dates in your mind, or kind of even practicing things, or like personalizing things to yourself. Kind of, I find so impressive, there's AI yoga and meditation apps now that personalize a practice to you. And while you still have to be the person to do the practice, that's where some of that struggle comes in. There's things that make it just that bit easier and just that bit more accessible. And so kind of having technology with regards to health and monitoring and managing our health and well-being. I think having access to those things can be really useful as long as we stay boundaried and we make sure that we are developing our self-awareness and developing our connection with ourselves rather than distancing ourselves and kind of distrusting our awareness of ourselves because we are relying on technology to tell us those things.
Yeah, definitely. So we look at, things like having access to data and tracking our behaviors, right? Which can have a huge impact on, sometimes we don't realize what we do and how we do it. But just having that ability to either log it manually or ideally as well, when we're looking at all of these different kind of trackers, monitoring your steps, monitoring your intake of specific foods, tracking your cycles and so on, we can have a lot of useful data that we can then act on to correct some of our behaviors, which otherwise we wouldn't even realize that we are doing this, right? So it's really, really useful way of doing it. The other thing that you mentioned as well is this kind of outsourcing this heavy cognitive workload to external source, right? So we don't have to remember all of the dates, all of the calendar appointments. We don't have to hold so much information in our heads. We can really free up that cognitive capacity and outsource it elsewhere. And with things like AI, I know that this being mentioned here as well, we should really utilize it to our best potential to look at what are specific things that I want to be doing, what are specific things I don't want to be doing, and can we utilize technology to take care of those routine admin tasks in a way that is the most effective and efficient for our ways of working. And with that comes that that access to information. Before, like, you would have to write an article, you would spend days, weeks in libraries going sourcing different books and so on. Well, now you can just do a little bit of a search, and you have all of these huge databases to come up with data and information that can be useful. But on the other hand, you need to know which of this information is actually helpful for my well-being, and which one is, there's a lot of these health fads out there, right? That, you don't know whether, we're doing things that are really science-based, or is it just because this is a bit of a marketing myth that is being pushed to everyone. Again, risks of social comparisons, right? When you're looking at Instagram for comparing your looks and all of the filters, and the impact on things like eating disorders for young children, we really, really cannot be underestimated. I ask question about positives, but I'm kind of already starting to lean to negative sides of those.
I think that's quite natural as well. And, so much of this is about the balance. And I think that kind of, we most of us recognize the positives and the negatives in our phone use. And the harder ones to spot are about, maybe relationships around control and self-monitoring. And when we start to depend on apps to make decisions for us, tell us what to do, and when that starts harming our own confidence and trust and our own problem solving, that's where I think we need to become a bit more conscious. But I think that it's also important to recognize our own personal relationship with it. Just responding to your comment here, James, about you have ADHD and phones can be a huge distraction, and that it's about learning how to navigate that system, society, virtual reality can all be quite an overload. And so prioritizing is the important thing here. So recognizing, if you do have ADHD, you are going to be more prone to addictions generally, anything that's going to give you that dopamine, phones being the most easily accessible one. And so maybe there's more boundaries that you want to put in place. Like, I have ADHD as well. That's why when I don't want to be looking at my phone, not only do I put it on do not disturb, but I put it out of sight and out of reach to put those extra barriers in place so that I'm not leaning on it. Equally, things like kind of your state of mind, your emotional state at the time. asking yourself, is now a good time for me to receive that information? Because we're not in control always of the information we might receive through our phone. We don't know what kind of messages might pop up that could be inflammatory or triggering and change our emotional state. So just taking a moment to ask ourselves, is now the right time? Am I in the right state? Is it the best thing for me to use my phone? And so anything that you can put in place, you knew that I had ADHD. Probably because I get distracted by the comments and finish my sentences.
Oh, so funny.
But there's yeah, so it's kind of anything to put that barrier in place, that boundary, so that you can make the decision and be a bit more conscious about it as well. Because as I'm sure you've noticed with me, that I can, I'll immediately say what I'm thinking sometimes without having that barrier. It's the same with our behavior. You can immediately reach for a phone without actually having that gap to choose. Hang on, is this the right thing for me now?
Yeah.
Is this going to be the most beneficial for me? So anything you can do to put that boundary in place so that you have a bit more space to become conscious of your phone use.
Yeah, and for me, like I said, putting my phone on permanently on silence is the best thing that I ever done. I also have specific times in a week where I block out a day or a day and a half a day, where I don't have any screen time. And it's really good to have the so-called dopamine detox, where you want to reduce the data input that we are constantly downloading into our brains from all of these different screens, and reduce stimulation through this kind of superficial environments, right? So just having a day where to me, what is very interesting to observe what is happening to our mindset and our ability to focus and concentrate when we have those days when we completely remove our screens. And you just become, at the beginning, it can be quite uncomfortable because you kind of like, itching to do things and do a little bit more. But once you get over that initial discomfort, you realize how much more present and calm you can be and how much more engaged with the current environment you can be. So, going out for a walk and, not looking at, his beautiful sunset, let me take the photo of that, right? Just like, going for a walk and not even having a phone with you. It really changes your relationship with this present moment here and now. And what happens to me that at the end of those few days, I get really creative. Like I have ideas flowing out of me. I end up, writing things down, and I create content, and it's really, really nice way of kind of clearing all of this overload of information and just connecting with ourselves. And when we do that, we connect with ideas and create content inside out rather than outside in.
Absolutely. And so kind of bringing this back to organizations a little bit, what kinds of things can you do in your organization to encourage that boundary and that kind of space for people to not be on their phones and not be engaging with technology? So putting time in the calendar where no one's to have meetings. There's an expectation that you won't be checking Slack or Discord or whatever it is that you use, Teams, that you won't be checking those, really building that into the culture that people aren't immediately accessible all of the time. There's some that we respect those boundaries actually, and we don't contact people outside of working hours, or if somebody, maybe there's a quota of hours that you have to have in your calendar where you are unavailable for instant messaging or things like that. Any kind of initiative that's backed by the organization, I think, can make a really big difference, because a lot of the time people, especially with work and checking work phones, you feel like you're doing a better job if you're available all the time and responding to things immediately. And actually what you might be doing there is responding a bit more thoughtlessly, and you might be actually harming your ability to focus on longer form tasks and be creative, which will benefit your working life, but we feel that we're doing a good job and we have slightly more instant gratification if we just respond to something immediately. And actually taking a step back, being a bit more thoughtful and strategic about creative sometimes about how we approach things can end up with better results.
Creating more space between, kind of triggers and our emotional outputs, and then behavior that would come at the back of it, instead of like really responding here and now on this kind of high emotional, impulsive behavior. Tamara is commenting here saying that she's been creating a program for parents to help them curate healthy tech habits at home. That sounds great. Would love to know a little bit more about this, because I think, again, it's just so useful to embed those healthy habits from early days and kind of have some of those boundaries. And even though obviously as parents, we want to set very different boundaries to what kids want to have, but just by teaching them to set some of their own boundaries can really help them in the future to achieve some of those goals, and to not to overload them with this dopamine of instant rewards. So we are much more likely to achieve great things in life, right? So absolutely, it's it is so important that we have those healthy boundaries. And for me, the other thing that I find very helpful is that I have now utilized technology to structure my day and my week in much more healthier way. So for example, I block out regular time for my breakfast, for my lunch, for my dog walks, so no one can book anything in those times. And I have that as a protected time that is a priority. And you just block out some of those blocks in your calendar where you are prioritizing yourself and your well-being, right? Instead of like we do normally, you just allow everyone to contact you, everyone to message you, everyone to book meetings in your calendar, and then you realize that you are running 100 miles an hour without actually really achieving much or getting to the goals and results that you want. And when we talk about those boundaries, a lot of that is about expectations, right? We have this expectation of instant reward, and we have this expectation of people to get back to you instantly. And we have to change that. We really have to change that. And it's all about, it's very interesting. I've been at COGEX festival yesterday, and I was at the talk watching Stephen Bartlett have a conversation with Fearon Cotton, and Fearon asked, "Is it possible to achieve success without compromise?" And Stephen replied something along the lines that it is if we learn how to prioritize consistency over intensity, right? And really reducing the intensity and the load that we have to have everything here and now and kind of run at 100 miles an hour. Instead, we can reduce that intensity and have more of a routine, and we can take smaller steps consistently, and we're still gonna get there, instead of really kind of burning ourselves out and really go take ourselves to extremes, right?
Absolutely. So just kind of summarizing some of the points we've raised a little bit, and so that you can best manage your technology use for your well-being. If you're an individual trying to put barriers in place, sometimes quite literally physical barriers, space barriers, but also technological barriers. So putting your phone on do not disturb, airplane mode, silent, putting it out of the room, out of sight. Asking yourself the question, is this best for me? Noticing your relationship with apps and things like search engines, and also self-monitoring apps. Are we becoming dependent on them so that we don't trust ourselves to figure these things out in other ways, or to read our own bodies? Can we recognize in ourselves what we're going to the phones for? What is our motivation there? What might we be trying to escape? Looking at this relationship between kind of challenge, struggle, and reward, and actually recognizing that that's something we want to practice. We don't want it to be instant gratification, otherwise we won't develop our ability to achieve in that way. And if you're an organization, to really encourage your staff to put those boundaries in place. And like you say, Evelina, manage the expectations around it. What are the expectations on staff, and what are the expectations on the organization in terms of responsibility taking there, but also in response time? I'm not sure if there's anything I've missed there.
Yeah, that's great, definitely. And I can see Tamara also had added quite a lot of comments about some of her work and some principles and foundations that we need to put in place for establishing those boundaries and rules with children. So it's really, really great. Yeah, it's all about boundaries and redefining expectations. And this is it's not about, sometimes people ask, so is technology good or bad, right? Using phones, is it good or bad? And actually, the technology itself is neither good nor bad. It's just a tool, right? What will make the difference between whether it's good or bad for us? It's our relationship with it, right? And that's what we need to redefine, right? What is our relationship with this piece of technology? What are we depending on, right? And where are we using it to help us, to support us, and where it's becoming a distraction and something that is hindering our progress and our ability to act on our intentions. And I know that for me, I can get into that state where my comfort zone becomes my biggest enemy. And I know that when I'm just comfortable and like relaxed and not doing much, I just end up, wasting so much time on the phone. And it's horrible. It's a horrible state to be in, where you took your phone to check one message, and 3 hours later you realize that you are still scrolling for something, right? Well, you're supposed to be doing something else. So what can we do to prevent those instances from happening? And for me, some of the best ways of doing it is actually, instead of relying on the phone, using more of a so-called like Internet of Things, kind of smart home technology, where instead of you checking your phone to ask a question, you could maybe ask Alexa and to have that question and answer, which doesn't visually distract us from kind of going on a roller coaster to do certain things. When we have technology where, let's say, our trackers are automatically collecting some biofeedback from us, right? Like we have smart rings or smartwatches and so on. And therefore we just receive a summary of insights with recommendations, instead of us needing to log it manually all the time, which, takes so much time and effort, and it becomes inaccurate anyway, right? So it's looking at how we can utilize all of this to support us, and how can we use technology to automate a lot of those processes, habits, reminders, in terms of structuring our days, structuring our habits, planning our calendars and blocking out the time for those things, and really minimizing the opportunity for unwanted distractions, and for kind of taking us on the course of the journey, which will overly consume us.
Absolutely. So hopefully that's kind of given everyone a bit of a summary of some tips of ways to manage your phone use and technology use generally, so that it's beneficial for your well-being. And also just a little bit of insight into the kind of current state of things with those statistics at the beginning, and hopefully that will kind of contribute towards gaining a little bit of awareness around how we engage with technology, and just developing that consciousness and intentionality around it, rather than kind of just immediately responding or being somewhat at the will of our.
Absolutely, yeah. And redefining the relationship. Sometimes, we need to clearly explain to others that do not expect instant response from me. Like for me, it took a while to redefine that in my network, and absolutely this can be hard when you're trying to create those behaviors that are only for you and nobody else in that environment are following the same rules. And that's where organizations can play such a huge role, because the part of the culture you create, the habits, expectations, and behaviors that you embed in your ways of working can really change people's relation with technology, with themselves, and therefore create those habits that drive their health and well-being. So we hope that's the message to take, and reflect on what is your relationship with technology and how can you align your company's culture to utilize technology for good instead of being that a hindrance.
Absolutely.
So thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week. Thank you for engagement and your comments. And yeah, great to connect. And I'm sure we'll continue our conversation. So thank you, and we'll see you next week.
See you next